And if I start to cry, will you please make a funny face? What seemed like a lifetime ago, I was the new hire at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the first female reporter the sports department had ever brought on. I remember sitting with the sports editor the morning I began the job, and he asked me, hypothetically, if you're ever put on the Dallas Cowboys beat, what would be your approach to working with the players, the coaches, and the front office? I said to him, I treat the Cowboys the same way I treated high school and college teams. I would never lose sight of the fact that even the Dallas Cowboys are people too. And I would treat them like people and not as commodities. My sports editor, a grizzled newsman, he looked at me and he said, they don't care how you treat them, they just want you gone. And then he looked at me and he said, you will never make it in this business. Oh, and then he added, welcome to your first day. A year later, that sports editor was reassigned within the newspaper, and a year after that, my new boss did assign me to the Dallas Cowboys beat. On my first day as a Cowboys beat reporter, I walked into my office at the team's practice facility, and replaying through my head were the words of my first editor. You'll never make it in this business. But I didn't change. I treated the players like people, and I discovered that they were good with that. In fact, the year Herschel Walker supplanted Tony Dorsett at running back, Dorsett did everything he could to avoid speaking to the press. One afternoon, I was in the practice facility locker room, and I noticed all the other reporters had vanished. Panic set in, and I knew they were conducting an interview somewhere, and I wasn't there. When I found them, they were dozens deep at Tony Dorsett's locker, and I was so far back I couldn't hear a word until Tony shouted, get the hell out of here! I'm sick of this! And I'll just paraphrase, cow dung. The crowd of reporters dispersed, and I stayed standing in the same spot, a bit of a distance from Tony. He looked up at me and he shouted, what? Huh. And then in a very low voice, I looked at him and I said, so does this mean you are or you are not willing to talk? Tony slouched his shoulders, shook his head, and looked at me and said, sit down. I got the exclusive. So what did I learn? First, be who you are. Don't listen to anyone who tells you that in being who you are destined to fail. 75% of all college presidents are men, but that did not stop Karen Scalforo. Will you please stand, Karen? 91% of screenplay scripts sold in Hollywood are written by men, but that did not stop Betsy O'Neill. Where's Betsy? 86% of health industry chief executive officers are men, but that did not stop Michelle Bodwin. I can go on because what we have here, and I get emotional, is an incredible graduating class. Somehow these men and women from Florida, from Texas, Illinois, Maryland, Tennessee, and from down the street, we've all come together and converged to this moment. You all have something that we all need. You all have your life experiences, you all have your stories, and you all have the guts to tell those stories, whether they manifest in memoir or in fiction. And that's hard. As author Paulo Coelho de Souza once said, writing is a socially acceptable form of getting naked in public. And I guarantee you, to this day, the emperor in his new clothes probably wishes he had been a writer. I also learned that in the vast reaches of this universe, no one can tell us what you can? No one. In the 2 years since we began this journey in the mountains of New Hampshire, we have learned how to tell our stories, and we have learned how to tell them well. And what's so beautiful about this journey is that we've lived it in an environment of support and trust. Different from the newspaper industry, where a good day for me meant a bad day for my competition, and of course vice versa. But not here. We all likely remember our first night of residency, the communal dinner, the faculty readings. I remember it differently. I stayed in my room that night. I ate granola bars for dinner, and I cried on the phone with my sister back in Dallas. Earlier in the day, I had experienced my first workshop, and right out of the chute, I found myself forced to evaluate the work of my peers who were writing stories so raw and so real that in an instant I knew that I was not worthy. I must have stunned Diane and Amy when I began to cry. During the second round of peer reviews, I had convinced myself that my work, the story of a woman I never met, would never live up to the stories of my peers who peeled away layers of their lives, revealing their most private moments, their greatest heartaches, and their glorious triumphs. I was at a crossroad. Today, we find ourselves at a crossroad. As we move forward from the confines of imposed deadlines, assigned readings, and designated page lengths, we have now only ourselves and the limits and the deadlines and the dreams that we impose. 2 years ago, we put ourselves on a track. That track began at SNHU, but it does not end here. Not if we continue to be not only dreamers, but dreamers who dare to do. As Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. So if you choose to sit there, my hope is that there is the chair at the table of your dreams. And in those lonely moments, when you stare at a blank screen or at a blank sheet of paper, may you hear the whisper of the late college basketball coach Jim Valvano, who on the precipice of his days implored us all, don't give up, don't ever give up. Thank you.